Hey guys. As you heard yesterday, I've started a Patreon for And the Runner Up Is, where you can gain early access to regular episodes, get invited to a Slack channel specifically for the show, and listen to exclusive bonus episodes. What you are about to hear is a preview of the first bonus episode, which is part of a new series I'm calling On Second Thought, where I am joined by guests in reviewing a Best Picture nominee not covered on the show for its particular Oscar year. To gain access to the full episode, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup and become a patron. Now, presenting a preview of the first episode of On Second Thought. Hello, and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. On March 11th, 2018, I released my first episode of And the Runner-Up Is about the 2017 Best Picture race, where Sebastian Gronbach and I discussed how Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri was the runner-up that lost Best Picture to The Shape of Water. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really Get Out? Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of And the Runner-Up Is. This is the first ever Patreon bonus episode, and with this series, this will be a sub-series of And the Runner-Up Is, which is called On Second Thought, which basically means a movie that was nominated for Best Picture that I did not cover as the runner-up on the main show, but some people have still argued that this movie might indeed actually be the runner-up of that year. The Academy has never revealed vote totals, so this is all hypothetical. So what we are talking about today, since my very first episode was about the year 2017, that means I will be covering another movie from 2017, and that is the wonderful Get Out. And to join me, I have two special guests, one of which you have heard once, I believe. Yes, just once on the Born on the 4th of July episode for 1989 from Next Best Picture, Mr. Josh Parham.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm very much looking forward to talking about this episode.
Yes, thank you. And also, you heard this guy talking about The Social Network 2010. You also heard him doing a bit of the Oscar nomination coverage back when that insanity was happening. Another one of my colleagues from Gold Derby, Mr. Rob Licuria.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Yes. So let's talk about a movie that is being talked about more and more these days, obviously, because of the release of Jordan Peele's follow-up, Us. We today are going to be talking about his directorial debut, Get Out. So, to get into a summary of the film, it is a horror film about a young black photographer named Chris Washington who has a white girlfriend, Rose Armitage, and Rose is set to take Chris to meet her parents for the first time, and Chris is sort of questioning whether they know that he's black, since this can be an issue with some parents, and she basically assures him that it's going to be fine. And once they arrive, Chris observes some very strange behavior with some of the black workers at the house, including their groundskeeper, Walter, and the housekeeper, Georgina, and just a general weirdness with Rose's parents, Dean and Missy. And that night, Missy conducts a therapy session with Chris that turns into a hypnosis. And Chris soon finds himself sinking into a void called the sunken place. And from there, Chris starts to unravel the Armitage family's dark and twisted and deeply unsettling secret. So the film was written and directed by Jordan Peele, his directorial debut. It stars Daniel Kaluuya as Chris, Allison Williams as Rose, Bradley Whitford as Dean, Catherine Keener as Missy, Caleb Landry Jones, Stephen Root, Lakeith Stanfield, Marcus Henderson, Betty Gabriel, and Lil Rel Howery. So Get Out made $176 million at the US box office, was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning 1, but of course not Best Picture. So we are 2 years out now from Get Out. So I want to take it one at a time here, starting with Josh, to ask how we feel about Get Out 2 years later and how we feel that it has endured.
Well, I would say that of most of the movies that came out in 2017, I think that Get Out is one that has, I would say, aged better than most of them, to be honest with you. I think that Get Out, as we get further away from it, just grows in estimation in my mind. And I think when it first was released, we knew that it was very important and popular in the culture. But I think as we've gotten further away from it and we see, again, kind of returning back to these touchstone moments where people really go flock to the movies for these films that have this very strong resonance within the culture. And I think in particular, Black culture, it just becomes even more of an incredible achievement. So I think I'm not ready to use the M word for masterpiece with it, but I do think that it is just an incredible piece of filmmaking that only gets smarter and smarter every time I think about it.
Yeah. And Rob?
My estimation for this film just keeps going up. So when I first saw it, I was just completely and utterly spellbound by it. Because there's so much to love about it artistically, but also what it's trying to say about society. It came out at just the right time, and I think, especially in the US, it's become even more relevant, and it probably will remain relevant even more so as the years go on. I would say that it actually probably is a masterpiece. I can't fault it. It's one of those films that you can watch over and over again and get something new out of it. And for me, that is a real yardstick for judging how much you love and appreciate film. It's just, it showed that Jordan Peele had arrived as a real bona fide auteur who really kind of just did the most beautiful job unexpectedly, because I wasn't expecting what transpired throughout the film. And every time I think about it, it puts a smile on my face because it's just such a pleasure to watch.
Yeah. Speaking to that, I think this is a movie that very much came out of nowhere, essentially. Like, we have a lot of Oscar contenders that become what they are. Like, for example, this year people are already talking about something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or any kind of British costume drama, or a film about a important figure. And all of these movies just kind of get that Oscar buzz right away without even anyone seeing a frame of it. Whereas this movie actually started to build the buzz authentically. And I think that the fact that it really just comes out of nowhere for a lot of people back when people are first seeing it in Sundance in January of 2017, I think is a big factor in how people felt about it. The idea of a movie surprising you, I think, can make you feel more attached to it. And that's certainly how I felt. I mean, I think the movie, I've seen it like maybe 3 or 4 times now, and I think it always is entertaining for me. It's always makes me stop and think. It has a simple premise, but also I feel that it is just so deceptively layered. And the film is just so laden with symbolism from the very get-go, and things that I didn't pick up on in my first 1 or 2 watches. I start to notice very, very early foreshadowed things, like the inclusion of Childish Gambino's song Redbone, which has lyrics like, stay woke and don't you close your eyes and things like that, to the fact that Chris is like putting on shaving cream that is white, slathering it all over his face. Like, these are all things that foretell exactly how this film is going to play out. And for a directorial debut to do that so confidently is endlessly impressive for me.
Well, and not only just a directorial debut, but also somebody who really we didn't know was capable of making something so complex and layered and interesting. Because, all due respect to Jordan Peele, coming from the world of comedy like he did, we all knew that he was funny, but I would rather say that nobody really felt like he was capable of creating something that could be funny and scary and deep and philosophical and just all of these different elements coming together in this one movie. That I think is even the bigger shock. And it really established him as like not only a good filmmaker, but a very competent and very mature storyteller, which to me is the even more impressive thing that has come out of that film.
Yeah, and just on the back of that, at Key and Peele, we all know what Key and Peele is, and a lot of us are fans of that show. And for a couple of years, it was Keegan who was the standout, getting Emmy nominations for his comedic performances on that show. And I always thought in the back of my mind, poor Jordan Peele is kind of maybe just been a bit forgotten in that space. And then all of a sudden, he comes out with this very acerbic, funny, and like beautifully made film that could have been quite divisive, but was embraced by all different types of people because it was just so undeniably beautiful to look at and enjoyable to watch, and it had something really relevant to say. So very surprising. And then that was my first reaction watching this. I had no idea what to expect because I wasn't really reading about all the hype. I just thought, yeah, I'll see it out when it finally comes out in theaters, and we'll see what happens. And I'll probably get a little scared because it's a horror movie. So much more than that. And it was also so funny, which makes sense given who directed it.
Right, exactly. And that's funny you say that about the Key versus Peele comparisons with Key and Peele, because I definitely remember at the time people feeling like, well, after Key and Peele happens, Keegan-Michael Key is just going to become this star. He's going to overshadow Jordan Peele in some ways. And things have really, Keegan-Michael Key has certainly had a good enough career after, but the amount of hype that Jordan Peele gets with every project he's going to take from now on is just astronomical. So let us definitely talk about these themes that are confronted in Get Out, because certainly very unique for the horror genre. This is a film that is really forcing white liberals, well-meaning white liberals, to confront some of the more insidious shades of racism that they either perpetrate themselves or they maybe turn a blind eye to when their friends do it or something like that. And I think it's like that otherizing, that being a little too loud about the fact that you would have voted for Obama for a third term, or saying you love Tiger Woods, or that, black is now in fashion or something like that. Because, far too often we've seen this depiction of racism in Hollywood films as just being the white conservative rednecks who are very blatant about their racism. And the white liberals in the audience could be like, oh, we're not like them. We're not racist. We're not like that. We're not that bad. When, really what a lot of people who feel that they are elevated do is a bit more sinister, and it's harder to spot because it's couched in all these manners and the decorum and the compliments and things like that. And I just love that Jordan Peele was able to convey it on such a accessible level without being too preachy about it or off-putting about it, just showing the black experience essentially in modern day America.
Yeah, the movie really does a fantastic job at showing that insidious level that hides just beneath the surface of, like you said, a lot of white liberals in particular, where people are well-meaning overall, but because they don't share the exact experience with somebody, it becomes like a blind spot to them. And instead of filling it with empathy and trying to understand, really it's just kind of instead filled with assumptions and even your own kind of biases that you don't even recognize, that you haven't confronted. And what's great about the film and what Jordan Peele really does with the material is that he recognizes how much evil there really is in that, and how so many people don't want to recognize it, but really there is this very like I said, evil intent to it that if you don't recognize it can actually have farther consequences that can really be destructive for people, both in that community and without it.
Yeah, like everybody comes from their own lens, right? And everyone perceives art and whatever through their own perspective. And while you're enjoying the film, while you're shoveling popcorn in your face, and you're in the moment, you're getting scared, or you're laughing at the jokes, it does force you to kind of have a look at yourself, depending on where you come from. Now, as a white male, and liberal, obviously, a lot of that benevolent racism that the film touches on quite perfectly. Also, to me, felt like it was also talking about ignorance, because obviously, if you're coming from a particular perspective, you can't necessarily, or maybe you're unable to empathize with the others in the community unless you're confronted by it, so that you can acknowledge it and then understand it and then work through that. And all that sounds like really painful or really academic, but the film is so perfect because it does it in such a way that is still entertaining and yet so thought-provoking. And also for myself as a foreigner, as an Australian, a lot of what the film is saying is news to me, because I don't live in the States and I don't quite understand the dynamic between the different communities within that country. But we have our own problems here as well. It's very, very universal. Every Western society has a similar type of benevolent racism from their white, liberal, I guess what the right wing would call the elite coastal people. And we have that too. And so the film did very well across, in various countries, because it spoke to that very universal truth, which is just so interesting to me.
Yeah. And I think the way that Chris in particular starts to put the pieces together is very smartly told, and it's not one of these things where you're necessarily like one step ahead. I mean, he's noticing the things that we are noticing as they are happening. So we might in the audience be like yelling to get out because this is a horrible situation, but I feel like it's very much him coming to understand the true depths of the very awful, insidious racism happening here. The very, very, very messed up situation that the Armitages are inflicting upon an entire community. And I definitely wanted to talk here about the Daniel Kaluuya performance, because he gets an Oscar nomination for it. And I think it's a nomination that some people would be like, okay, yes, he gives a good performance, but is it Oscar worthy? Because I think it's a subtle performance, and he is balancing a lot of different emotions at the same time, and he's not necessarily loud about them. There's not a lot of speechifying, but I wanted to get both of your takes on this performance in particular.
I mean, I guess you could say to a certain point it's a subtle performance, but he is doing some very dramatic things in it. And I do remember hearing people say, like, oh, this isn't really a performance that the Oscars go for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is mainly just them looking at the genre, because to me, that is a performance that is layered and is interesting. I mean, all you have to do is just look at the scene, the first hypnosis session, and the ability for him to sit there not moving and convey all of these different things that are going on within his mindset, and you can read all of that with very little movement. Like, that is a master class in acting. Like, I don't care who you are, what type of movie that you're in, that is incredible skill. And I absolutely love the way that he's able to be that audience surrogate, but he is intelligent enough to understand the situation that he's in is not normal, and slowly discovering what is actually going on is kind of leading the audience to discover that as well, but doing it in a very intelligent way that serves the character, serves the screenplay. And I think that he's just incredible. I think it's a very well-deserved nomination, not one that we normally see too often, but so glad it happened.
Yeah, I totally agree. You mentioned the audience surrogate or surrogacy. That is so critical for a film. As the hero of the film, and by the way, I think his performance and his character is quite heroic, obviously because of what transpires towards the end, how he gets through such a challenging thing that he has to deal with. But the first hypnosis scene with Catherine Keener is absolutely spellbinding. Like it's just. I was really shocked by how affected I was by him sitting in a chair, kind of motionless with tears streaming down his face. To me, that is an iconic scene now. And the image of that, which I see sometimes on social media, will stay with me for a very long time. And a lot of that credit must go to Daniel Kaluuya, because even though Jordan Peele directed him so beautifully, he brings so much to this role that may not have necessarily worked for an actor who isn't able to bring you in as the surrogate for the film, because you empathize with him, you are rooting for him, you care about him, and all of that I think is him. He does a really good accent.
Yeah.
He is so different to this character from what we've seen of him going forward, and even before Get Out. You can see that he's nothing like this character at all, and I was so happy that he was nominated. I was really rooting for him to win that Oscar, but obviously that's a different conversation. But yeah, he got a lot of nominations throughout the Oscar season, and I think he won a couple of things too, and rightly so. Very, very, very amazing performance.
Yeah, it is a very inspired nomination. And, I understand the doubt that was happening at the beginning of the season, because we don't often see horror performances nominated. But yes, it has a lot of depth to it. And that scene in particular, in the hypnosis, I mean, it's also one of these things where when you're watching it again, it's really a film that rewards repeat viewings. That when they hit the deer, while driving, and he has a very intense emotional reaction to it. You don't necessarily understand why, beyond just like a general compassion. But then once you know his past, that scene becomes even more full of depth. So yeah, it's a fantastic performance, and one that I think will endure, hopefully, through the ages. Other performances here, I have to say, Allison Williams, quite a revelation in this film. I mean, I knew her from watching Girls, that she was just kind of the worst. Her character was kind of the worst on that show, Marnie. But here she is just leaning into like the worst tendencies of, like, she's just leaning into her own stereotype in certain ways, which I found to be very compelling. And she is also doing a lot of balancing of, trying to keep up this ruse for so long, and then just immediately dropping into becoming essentially like this sociopath by the end, once she drops the facade. And it's such a great performance. I do wish she had gotten a few nominations more than she did, but what do you guys think of this Allison Williams performance?
Well, it's interesting that for me, because I am a terrible television watcher, I really do not watch a lot of TV. So I have not seen a single episode of Girls. So going into that movie, I didn't have any expectation of her as an actress. So for me, I was just watching this performance and going just by the characterization, and I think that she's great in it as well. And you're right, like, she's good throughout most of the movie, but as soon as the switch happens where she drops the facade, that's when you get like this whole new dimension to this character. And to see somebody so coldly calculated in everything that they're doing, but still being able to sell that is really fascinating. And in addition, she's also playing a character that, like most of the things in the movie, is a bit exaggerated for the genre, but still represents something very much within the culture of people that seek out romantic relationships, maybe for reasons that are more superficial in terms of dating members of a particular race, and what it is that you're actually seeking value from that. Are you really finding somebody that you want to be with, or is there some aesthetic quality that you're looking for? And again, a little dialed up for the genre, but still speaking to a very relevant truth that plays out so often in today's culture.
Such an interesting perspective, because unlike Josh, I came into the film being very, and like you, Kevin, very familiar with the Marnie character from Girls, and not in a good way. Because even though I watched the show on and off, I think it petered out for me towards the last couple of seasons. I never liked her character, and therefore I had prejudged Alison Williams, and every time I would see her on screen, I'd be thinking about this Marnie character that I wasn't very fond of. And the beauty of this film is it took about 3 seconds for that to just completely leave my head. And I was so invested in her character as well. I really liked her, and I was really, really interested in what she had to say. And I tell you, like, just for a gut reaction, I was actually so disappointed when her character turns, because I mean, she got me, so to speak. Like, the ruse was with me as well. I fell for her, and then she turned and became this complete psychopath, and I felt slightly gutted.
Thank you for listening to this preview of the first episode of On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup.is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes, a Slack channel, and my eternal gratitude. Thanks again, guys. I really appreciate your support.